Economic sanctions are a pretty blunt instrument. Just ask Fidel Castro in Cuba. No different in Russia, Rob. Last year's sanctions, some interesting effects. One of them seems to involve some cheese.
Yeah,
you've just been in Moscow.
I just was in Moscow last week, and one of the most interesting sort of unintended consequences of the sanctions from the European Union and the United States is that cheese. Well, it wasn't actually. The Russians retaliated against the sanctions and closed off agriculture and food imports, including cheese.
Right.
So you've had to have this import.
So you can still get some Emmental from Switzerland.
You can get Emmental. There's holes enough there to get those through. But so cheese production is up 30% in Russia. That's like one of these Soviet Union
So they're making versions of Parmesan cheese.
Yeah,
and all these other
but that's one of the sort of more appetizing unintended consequences. There are a lot of others. So going through this, and I've got a column coming out on it. But basically, you look at Putin's approval rating. It's 86%, which is much higher than it was before the annexation of Crimea and the sanctions.
And you could argue, presumably, that's something to do with nationalism. The country gets isolated, people rally behind the leader.
That's right. I mean, you have a variety of things happening. So Western, sort of international capital flows have dried up. So that means that Russia is now working a lot more closely with China, which is probably not one of the was not intended as a result of the sanctions. Similarly, what you have is, and this happens all the time when you have capital that's scarce, the banks are happy to lend to big state-owned enterprises where they think, in a sense, they have the full faith and credit of the Kremlin behind them. So that means like a Gazprom, Rosneft, these guys are getting capital from largely two state-owned banks, Sberbank and VTB. But the small and medium guys, who are really the lifeblood of any economy for that matter, and are the sort of entrepreneurial free market businesses that you certainly don't want to penalize, are the ones who are being penalized.
So these sanctions, the idea, I think, was to hurt Putin, but also to hurt his circle, and try and make them kind of work on him somehow. But the fact is, this stuff trickles down. Well, it more than trickles down. It affects that base of businesses and people more than the
World Bank last week put out a warning saying that the decline in the Russian economy, which is partly as a result of sanctions and mostly a result of lower oil prices, frankly, but they say that it is threatening the progress that they've made over the past 15, 20 years, or really since the wall came down and Yeltsin came in. It's making people poor, not normal people poor, not just the oligarchs surrounding Putin, and that's problematic.
You've got a long way to go to make most of them poor. That's the problem.
And they still have access to capital. They may not be able to jet into Nice as easily as they did in the past, but those guys are fine, and their businesses are securing funding from state-owned banks, and largely as a result, you could argue that's giving Putin more power, more consolidation of his power, rather than less. And I think that it's one of these things. Look, sanctions are really an imperfect tool, as you mentioned at the outset. Castro, the mullahs in Iran, you take your pick, but there are so many obvious examples here of unintended consequences that it bears thinking about, particularly as this story in Ukraine continues to roll on.
All right, thanks for that, Rob. Interesting take. We will have more breaking views for you tomorrow.